Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this forum on climate action and community development, presented by the Michigan Sustainable Business Forum in partnership with Act Now on Climate. My name is Daniel Schoonmaker, and I'm the Executive Director of West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum and facilitator of today's event. This is part of a project we've been working on to promote the need for investment in climate solutions, infrastructure, and environmental justice in the public and private sectors. Michigan is emerging from a series of crises that have forced business and community leaders to reckon with the impact of climate change and the disproportionate vulnerability of its under-resourced communities, creating a common ground opportunity for grass tops and grassroots leaders to collaboratively influence state and federal policy. We believe that sustainability and sustainable business advocates in the states are beginning to recognize that limited progress can be made on broader environmental concerns while basic human needs are not being met due to economic or environmental injustice. Further, there's a growing recognition that climate impacts and deteriorating infrastructure are putting residents in harm's way. Improving outcome for Michigan's under-resourced communities is a shared priority for business and community leaders alike. I'm really looking forward to this discussion today, and I want to thank all of our speakers for giving us their time. First, I'd like to welcome Congressman Andy Levin, a union organizer, human rights activist, workforce policy expert, and green energy entrepreneur. Mr. Levin has spent his career fighting for an equitable and inclusive future for all people. He's brought that fight to Congress as the proud representative for Michigan's 9th District. Dr. Kyle Whyte is the George Willis Pack Professor of Environment and Sustainability at the University of Michigan, teaching in the environmental justice specialization. He currently serves in the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, the Management Committee of the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition, and the Board of Directors of the Pesticide Action Network North America. He served as an author of the U.S. Global Change Research Program and is involved with a number of organizations that advance Indigenous research and education methodologies. Lori Welch has worked with the City of Lansing for over 20 years, most recently in an award-winning waste management program and by spearheading both Lansing's first commercial and public recycling programs in the city. She is the City of Lansing's first sustainability manager and is responsible for maintaining, reviewing, and helping implementing existing sustainable plans and implementing new strategic environmental efforts, including its recent climate action commitments. Thank you all for joining us today. And I'd like to welcome to the stage Congressman Andy Levin.
Well, thank you so much, Dan. It's so great to see you, and I salute your long leadership on these issues with the West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, and now working, statewide and pulling something like this together. It's really terrific, and what an honor it is to be with these other panelists. I have been an environmental activist for my whole life since I was in college, but I really started this work in Michigan when I ran the state workforce system and then the entire Department of Energy, Labor, and Economic Growth under Governor Jennifer Granholm, our now U.S. Secretary of Energy. So I get to partner again with her in a new way. But, we've known about what was coming at us with climate change since the 1980s. And yet it was some kind of big innovative thing when in the late aughts in 2007, 8, we created a big green jobs program in Michigan. And right in Lansing there, Lori, we had the Green Jobs Summit. I think 1,000 people came, and Van Jones spoke, who was then at the White House working on environmental issues and environmental justice. And, we really pushed the envelope for the time on trying to move towards renewable energy. But we have so far to go. And I got a chance to work with Dan and many others of you again when I founded Lean and Green Michigan, our statewide PACE market, clean energy finance market. And I think I had to go to Congress, Dan, for it to really take off, because after I turned it over to other people, it has really been booming. And I think in the last 12 months, Michigan nonprofits, Michigan businesses have done more, both dollar volume and number of projects in PACE financing, which means a radical energy makeover of a YMCA, a hotel, a warehouse, a factory, than in the whole previous history. And we're going to have to continue to grow it massively to meet this challenge. But now I've tried to take all this to Congress, and I'm working very hard. I'm an original co-sponsor of the Green New Deal, and a lot of people say, oh, some of that stuff is unrealistic. Well, I have to tell you all something. If we snapped our fingers right now and passed into law all of our most ambitious proposals on energy transformation, it would not be enough, not according to some wild-eyed activists, but according to the boring, sober scientists of the world who just gave us the latest assessment of the climate change, disaster and demand. So I really think that we have an unprecedented moment here, and the president's Build Back Better budget that we, in the next 4 weeks from today, we need to try to have passed this. It would be by far the biggest piece of legislation on climate change across many areas, requiring a much more rapid transition to renewable energy and helping finance it to renewable energy for power from our utilities, to point of purchase credits to buy electric vehicles, to many other things. And my own activism in this area covers a wide range of bills. I've authored the EV Freedom Act, which would create a national comprehensive network of high-speed EV chargers within 3 years, in place within 3 years, so that you could get in an electric vehicle anywhere and drive anywhere else without worrying about running out of juice, not just in the lower 48, but even Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. My Build Green Infrastructure Jobs Act with Senator Elizabeth Warren would invest $500 billion over 10 years to jumpstart the transition to electrification more broadly. Public vehicles, city fleets, buses, school buses, transit, rail, and so forth. And again, partnering with Senator Warren, my Buy Green Act is basically about federal, state, and local government procurement, and including $1.5 trillion in federal procurement commitments over 10 years to purchase union-made, American-made, clean, renewable, emission-free energy products. And we would do the $1.5 trillion in 10 years, but we would use some of it federally, but also help the state and local governments. But it's not just about funding technological change. America's workers need to be in the game. They need to get the skills for this, and the cost of education has just gone through the roof. So the Build Back Better budget includes some significant forgiveness for debt for people who've already been to college, but centrally it includes my America's College Promise Act, which is just what the president wants to do, which is 2 years of free community college, tuition free and fee free at any community college in America, plus 2 years free at historically Black colleges and universities and other minority serving institutions. So this is all in the Build Back Better budget. It's a good start. It would do a lot. But one thing is perfectly clear. The government has to play a crucial role in guiding the transition to a green future. Our kids, my own kids, all of our kids have made it clear that they are done being told to save the planet by reducing, reusing, and recycling and changing their personal habits. That's all good, necessary, but they know that while changing light fixtures and thermostat temperatures helps raise consciousness and has an impact on the margins, only government policy that's smart, clear, and consistent will lead to the systemic change we desperately need to save this one little precious planet we all share. We've got to get to zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040 and try to do it even sooner. and it's going to take continued transformational efforts led by the government. But as my own experience shows with Leaning Green Michigan, the private sector absolutely being in there, investing in a big way, and let people make money at it. But when government makes clear, for example, that all new houses have to be zero net energy or better by a date certain, the contractors can crush that goal, the private sector, and let it be technology agnostic so that whatever the best technology that emerges can carry the day. So we've got to meet the moment, and we can't be afraid to modernize Congress to do so, because our arcane rules are holding us back. I'm a proponent of abolishing the filibuster so that it can't be used in a way that it's been used throughout its history, which is to prevent progress in this country. So it's full steam ahead. We've got to do everything we possibly can to save life on Earth as we know it on this planet. It's basically going to require a legislative agenda, Dan, that's bigger than at least anything since World War II, and probably bigger than that. And I say that doesn't make me afraid. It makes me excited. I'm ready to go. Thanks very much.
Only 18 months in. I think I know not to leave myself on mute. Thank you so thank you so much, Mr. Levin. Dr. Whyte.
Thanks, Dan, and good to be back in touch with you. Dan and I used to do some work together. I'm almost embarrassed to say, was it a decade ago? But it was maybe about 8 years ago. And I really value this work of building coalitions among key business leaders and entrepreneurs for the sake of sustainability and response to climate change, and just really encouraged by so much of what I've heard from business leaders in Michigan about their goals, their vision, and the actions that they're willing to take. What I wanted to discuss with you today was some of the federal actions and policies that are currently being discussed regarding environmental justice and the role that environmental justice is going to play, and how some of the infrastructure investments are going to be implemented. And I appreciate Congressman Levin's remarks and some of the great points that they made, especially the importance of equity and jobs and building back communities that have oftentimes been left out of previous historical periods of infrastructure investment. And so one of the things that it's important to notice is the prominence of the term environmental justice in some of the executive orders that the Biden administration immediately rolled out after the inauguration. So for example, Executive Order 14008 on tackling the climate crisis centers environmental justice. And when I refer to this concept, environmental justice, it refers to the idea that all communities, no matter race, class, gender, ethnicity, deserve to live in a clean, safe, and healthy environment. And also environmental justice includes the idea that communities, whether it's tribes or neighborhoods, that they need to be able to exercise their own plans for creating their own capacities to participate in this important energy transition and transition towards sustainability and transition toward lowering carbon footprint that we're currently undertaking right now. Environmental injustice refers to the situation that unfortunately many communities live in, where they live in neighborhoods or in tribal communities or in particular areas of cities or even rural areas that experience higher burdens of pollution, less access to green spaces, or they suffer a number of other health-related issues based on living too close to certain industrial or governmental operations like closed military facilities. And so there are thousands of communities that face environmental injustice. And so a key part of what the Biden administration is doing is creating federal policies that will make it so that when the infrastructure investments, especially the ones having to do with climate change resilience and reforming the energy sector, and clean water, that those investments will actually lift up the communities that have experienced generations of environmental injustice. And so environmental justice has become an extremely important framework for understanding how some of the spending and the implementation will occur with regard to these critical infrastructure investments that are on the table. Now, what does this mean more practically? Well, one of the Biden administration's policies that the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, which I'm part of, made recommendations on is called the Justice 40 Initiative. And this initiative is crucial for business owners and business leaders and entrepreneurs to understand, because it's likely to play a very, very pivotal role in how businesses should position themselves in relation to the infrastructure investments. So Justice 40 refers to the idea that in key federal investment areas such as clean water infrastructure, climate change adaptation, reform of the energy sector toward renewable energy or clean energy, 40% of the benefits of those investments, so the benefits of the investments, must serve communities that experience environmental injustice or communities that are underserved. So tribal communities, communities of color, communities that face social and economic barriers. So 40% of the benefits then really have to be meaningful for the development and the growth of those communities and the leadership of those communities in the energy transition, in the coordinated response to climate change, and also in the patching up of some of these huge infrastructure issues, like the many communities that still have inadequate water infrastructure. And so there's been a lot of attention paid within the federal agencies about what does Justice 40 mean? What does the 40% benefits mean? And one of the documents that I want to draw your attention to, which I'm going to put in the chat right now, is the recommendations that the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council made in May about the meaning of environmental justice. Now, I am going to give one caveat that we had to make those recommendations in like a very short period of time, like about a 5-week period of time. And it's a 90-page document. Most of the pages are focused on Justice 40. And so what I would encourage you to do is take a look at it, but to also just recognize that we were under a lot of pressure to make those recommendations. And there's a lot of information there and a lot of perspectives there. But the perspectives do represent people who work very closely with particular communities that have been facing environmental justice issues and who are really seeing that the transition to renewable energy and some of the other issues I discussed with respect to infrastructure are a pathway for communities to be uplifted so that they don't have to endure the current situations that they endure with respect to the environmental quality in their communities. And so it's an important document, I think, for business leaders to really understand what those community perspectives are. Now, in terms of business moving forward in the energy transition, it's absolutely critical that businesses really do look at further actions that they can participate in that will really undo some of the legacies of oppression and inequity in the United States. So, for example, my work is focused heavily on tribal communities. I'm a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, which is a tribe in Oklahoma. We're originally a tribe that's from right here in Michigan and right here in Ann Arbor, where I am right now. But for example, what does a renewable energy transition mean for Indian country? Well, you have to understand, right, that for many tribes, the Rural Electrification Act didn't reach those reservations. Many tribes suffer from poor transportation infrastructure, poor water infrastructure. And so to be able to actually build renewable energy infrastructure requires coordinated actions that would fulfill those infrastructural conditions that are needed to be able to set up, for example, a renewable energy operation that both supported that tribal community, but also could be part of some of the emerging energy markets. Another issue, for example, that tribes face is we oftentimes don't have access to some of the financing tools that we would need to be able to finance some of the businesses, some of the infrastructure that we would want to take advantage of, especially given that we are sovereign nations. And so it's important, I think, for businesses to think very carefully about what are some of the different financial tools and options that would make it possible for communities that don't have some of the same credit backing to be able to then participate meaningfully in some of this, rapid growth in infrastructure that is occurring. And in terms of at the government level, and I think this is relevant for businesses as well, it's important to note that for tribes, for example, we're exploring options like federal funding that doesn't require hefty matching, guarantees on loan programs, and other things that we know from experience will make infrastructure development much, much easier in Indian country. Now, for communities of color, again, many African American, Latinx, Asian American communities who are represented on the council made quite analogous observations to the ones that I made right now about their communities. It looks a little bit different from their perspectives, given their different communities, different cultures, different histories with infrastructure. And so I think right now we're at a moment where we're really focusing on those details. It's not just about that the investments will have a particular purpose. It's that the implementation of the investments will pay attention to the details of where communities are at, what communities need. Because we're very concerned that the infrastructure money will flow out of communities. It'll flow into the pockets of contractors who aren't from those communities and who don't put that income back into those communities for the growth and leadership of those communities in the energy transition. So I'll close there with my comments, but I just wanted to say that environmental justice is a crucial part of the Biden administration, but really we're focused on community development and ensuring that the energy transition and the move toward a more coordinated response to climate change is one that at the same time uplifts all people.
Thank you so much, Kyle. I really appreciate your sharing your expertise, and I learned a good bit just now myself. And Lori, I am really looking forward to hearing about your efforts in Lansing. Please tell us all about them.
Great. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks, Dan, and thanks to the Michigan Sustainable Business Forum for having me participate. It's an honor to speak with my fellow panelists here. So I will just kind of start to talk about what we're working on in the city of Lansing and maybe give a local government perspective for you all. But I think Dan mentioned this is a relatively new position for me as well as the city of Lansing. It was just created early last year. So I haven't been at this for a very long time, but really just jumped right in, recognizing the urgency and that there's really just no time to waste with our climate action plan. So one of the first things the city did was develop a municipal climate action plan that really covers our municipal operations, so all of our government facilities. We really wanted to get our own house in order, at least begin to, before we went out and told others in the community, that what our expectations were. So in this municipal plan, we have some pretty ambitious goals, including achieving carbon neutrality by 2040, having a 90% waste diversion rate by 2030, a significant reduction in our water waste. We also are looking at every part of our city operations, our policies, our ordinances, procedures, and doing a core integration, making sure sustainability and climate planning is incorporated into those things. And we also have a strong employee engagement goal. So some of the progress that we've made over the last year and a half or so, we have a contract to do some energy efficiency upgrades in quite a few city facilities that focus on HVAC systems, roofs, windows, and so forth, with some guaranteed energy savings. And we feel like those energy efficiency measures are really important to do right out of the gate. But we're also looking at renewable energy assessments, particularly in our community centers at this time, prioritizing resiliency. So we're looking at trying to create a resiliency hub. So if there is a storm, a significant weather event knocks out the power, we would have basic city services available to residents in those communities. We would be doing some on-site solar with storage, so we could make sure those services were available. We're also working on a lot of the things that, I think have already been mentioned, but we, working with the fleet manager to transition to electric vehicles and invest as much as we can in charging infrastructure. We've created an employee sustainability team. So about 15 people spread all across the city. These are not folks who have a background in climate planning or environmental, experience whatsoever, but they just are interested in helping the city achieve these goals. And they've been particularly helpful in our education and awareness campaigns. And we have focused our efforts with that on our mandatory recycling ordinance and how employees can conserve energy use, for instance. And another thing that we've started to work on is, and we're very close to adopting it, is a green purchasing policy, because we recognize that we have a lot of buying power and we want to make sure that whatever we buy, it's safe, it's non-toxic, it's not polluting, it's as energy efficient as it can be, it's recyclable, etc. So now that we have that municipal plan in place, we can start focusing on that kind of community plan and taking it outside of just the city's facilities. So we began drafting a community-wide sustainability action plan. And this plan is, again, focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions associated with transportation and buildings and other sources. And we will be setting a community-wide waste diversion goal and working towards protecting our water supply and reducing water use, as well as exploring renewable energy projects. And I would say that we are in a community engagement, or I guess a stakeholder engagement process with that. We have a newly formed sustainability commission that advises the mayor and staff, and this is made up of 13 community leaders, environmental leaders, many of whom have subject matter expertise in the areas of waste and water, transportation, land use, et cetera. We have prioritized environmental justice and equity to be emphasized throughout this entire plan during the drafting phase. So we recognize the importance of that. I'm hoping to have that draft completed by the end of the year. We are already starting to talk about more of a citizen engagement portion of that plan once it's adopted, so that we can take it to citizens and hear all voices, particularly those who aren't always heard, those parts of the city that may be underserviced. That's very important to us to hear what they have to say. Excuse me, the other things that we're working on is creating a greenhouse gas inventory for both municipal operations as well as the entire community, just to create a baseline of data so that we can use that to plan and forecast. Our challenge is that the data is not accurate always. It's not always complete. We recognize that many communities struggle with this, so we're really trying to prioritize making sure that from here on out, we do track that information better. And so the next time we do our inventory, we'll be able to have a little bit more comprehensive data. But we have, or I in particular, have really benefited from the networks and peer groups that the sustainability industry has. I've been very grateful to a lot of folks for sharing information and resources. And we recognize that we're just one community. There are many communities doing the same sort of work. I'm really thankful for the model of the Michigan Sustainable Business Forum. And we are kind of trying to do our own regional effort here in the greater Lansing area with the Capital Area Sustainability Partnership. And that was a regional effort that really began with myself and a couple of colleagues from East Lansing and Michigan State University last year, and has quickly grown to over 30 folks who are representing other municipalities, townships, cities, counties, as well as nonprofit organizations and others. And we really need to reach out to the business community. We know that, and to our local utilities to get a well-rounded forum. That's now facilitated by our Tri-County Regional Planning Office, which is wonderful because they've really the kind of institution that has worked on our regional transportation initiatives, for instance, but we'll also be prioritizing regional efforts with regard to greenhouse gas reductions and waste and organics and renewable energy projects as well. There are people in our region who have been working in this space for a very long time. There's also folks who represent communities who have no dedicated staff or resources to this. We're all at different places. So it really is beneficial when you are part of a regional effort and can learn from each other and collaborate whenever you can. So I'll stop there with that. I just wanted to say thank you once again for having me today.
Thank you so much, Lori. For anyone that's joining us today, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop those into either the Q&A feature you'll find, I believe, at the top of your screen for most operating systems, or into the chat function you'll find on the side of your screen. I do have a question to start out as well. And this is for each of our panelists. How would you describe the level of support that your constituents and our stakeholders are demonstrating for climate action? Is there a sense of urgency? And Congressman Levin, would you like to start off?
Sure thing. I would say that it's a mixed bag. On the one hand, there's still not nearly the level of urgency we need, and the realization that we need to completely transform everything about our economy: land use, agriculture, buildings, all transportation, all production of energy, everything, and global trade, and all to make things, make life sustainable in a renewable energy economy. But that said, on the other hand, it is light years beyond what it was even 10 years ago. I mean, if you think of the beginning of the Obama administration instead of the beginning of the Biden administration, there was kind of a feeble effort to do cap and trade, and it kind of quickly went down in flames. And the lesson was, oh, you can't do anything. And basically, outside of administrative moves, really, for the rest of the 8 years, there wasn't a lot of significant legislative effort. Now we have, this President Biden, who came in as, with a reputation of a life being kind of a lifelong moderate, and not having been super active on these issues personally, has assembled a team that is much more aggressive on this. And he himself is proposing much bolder things. But I guess they are responding to demand, the demand of young people, the demand of businesses. As usual, even the big business community is way ahead of the political sector. And as much as we will have a lot of policy tussles on this, there's an acceptance, a realization, I think, in much of the business community, that we need to move very quickly to a zero carbon economy. So I think there's a much greater sense of urgency, and that it's growing fast. And that's for a sad reason, which is, after a lot of us talking about this for a lot of years, now the horrifying effects of climate change are smashing us in the face every day. whether it's wildfires, inland floods, rising sea levels, drought, supercharged storms. And so I think the level of buy-in of my constituents anyway is rising rapidly. Like the water in our basements. And you're muted again, my friend.
Kyle?
In terms of the work I do with Indigenous people, Indigenous people and tribal nations are among the groups that have been most active in calling attention to climate change, even going back many decades. And in a national climate assessment, we found that unfortunately, Native people are going to be hit the hardest. I mean, among the communities that are having to permanently resettle due to climate change, it's Native people. For example, I appreciate Congressman Levin's bringing up some of the current climate change issues like wildfires. Wildfires that affect tribal lands are affecting lands that have already been diminished from what they were historically in size. And so certain impacts like wildfires can be highly detrimental to just a community's capacity to practice its own culture. And oftentimes when we hear news stories about climate change impacts, we get sort of an economic lens on it or a family lens on it. But for tribes, it's those things plus deep cultural issues, deep issues that affect tribes' self-determination and sovereignty. And many communities of color have been adamant and are very urgent about addressing climate change. And of course, we see why with recent floods and what communities were hit hardest by those floods in Detroit most recently. But one of the challenges that, at least within the sphere that I operate in, that I see coming up, is that oftentimes people that are representing communities, people that are working at the grassroots, as well as some tribal leaders, are trying to get more of a conversation going on some of the ethical issues that different solutions to climate change raise. Not all solutions are equal, and there are concerns, for example, that certain forms of renewable energy, they rely on dirty supply chains, they rely on mining, they rely on other high carbon footprint activities, and those activities oftentimes take place on the lands of Indigenous people in other parts of the world or in other parts of North America, or that affect people of color. Or for example, clean energy solutions like hydropower or nuclear or carbon capture and storage, they oftentimes rely on infrastructure, they rely on pipelines, they rely on other types of supply chains that will continue to have a negative effect on communities that are already burdened with environmental justice. And so I think it's important that as we all try to move toward pragmatic solutions to climate change, given how urgent it is, that we don't lose a connection to the fact that every single solution has ethics, equity, and justice issues. And we want to keep those front and center, because we don't want the energy transition to be one that is associated with the continuance of the same inequalities that we have today.
Thank you, Kyle. Lori?
I guess I'll just say it is kind of a mixed bag here as well. I do feel like there are quite a few folks here in the greater Lansing area that share that sense of urgency with me, and there's that expectation. From where I sit, maybe it's being in my position, I hear very loud and clear the local environmental community and other citizens who are engaged on this issue ask about the progress and are anxious to see more of it made. That said, I think there are others who I think are expecting action to be taken, but only where it's affordable and only when it's convenient. And I think that we at this point can't afford not to do it. And so that's my challenge, is trying to convince everybody that, it's a necessity at this point. And I think there's probably still others that just aren't engaged quite enough at all. So one of the biggest, I think, goals here is to create a lot more awareness within our community, and fully engage all citizens.
Thank you, Lori. And I've got a follow-up question for you as well. What support do communities like Lansing need from their partners in the federal government or the business community to achieve their goals?
Mhm. Well, we need a whole lot of support. We are taking advantage of all of, or at least, most of the incentives and the rebates, and we're applying for grants, and we're doing everything that we can to elevate this work, but without dedicated budget, it's incredibly challenging. So I would just hope that, we can prioritize programs where funds can flow directly to cities from the federal level, and continue, of course, with whatever rebates and incentives that can flow down as well. But we need to go beyond just the grants that we can get to having a little bit more comprehensive support to really meet those ambitious goals that all communities have, not just Lansing.
And this is the last question I have for our panelists. Given its recent history of environmental injustice and its longer history of economic and racial inequities, how might Michigan uniquely benefit from investments in climate change or infrastructure that prioritize justice and community development? Andy?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to start, Dan. I mean, hugely, and specifically, given the fact that we're sitting here in the middle of the Great Lakes, 20% of the world's fresh water, over 10,000 inland lakes, so much amazing water, and that we have this incredible industrial history, and that we have absolutely participated fully in our country's difficult history of genocide against Native Americans, slavery, Jim Crow, racism, other forms of oppression. We have a huge opportunity here, and our proud union history. We need to take on these issues in a way that can save our souls and redeem ourselves and make us so proud as Michiganders by putting frontline and vulnerable communities first, by having, education, workforce training, job opportunities available in those communities, focused on them. Let me just give you an example from the EV Freedom Act. We're now writing this into all of our legislation, Dan. So there's a huge focus on making sure that these vulnerable and frontline communities take full advantage of EV charging infrastructure. I'm talking about mandating that half the expenditures have to be in those communities. That we not only crush range anxiety by making sure high-speed charging infrastructure is available throughout the national highway system, but just as importantly, what about all the people who don't live in a house with a garage where they can put a charger? We need to help those communities, poor and working class people who live in an apartment building or a row house or whatever, be able to take full advantage of this. This helps. This is in full partnership with our great industrial history. We want to make offshore wind parts here. We want to make onshore wind parts here. The solar supply chain, the EV and AV auto and transit and rail parts here. So this can be great jobs and saving our planet, but we really have a huge opportunity to do it in a way that centers people who've been excluded from opportunity in having opportunity now. And that's to everyone's benefit because it saves the planet and gives us the most productive economy.
Thank you, Andy. Kyle, what are your thoughts?
I think that in Michigan, despite the fact that there's been so much inequity historically in Michigan, there are a number of grassroots organizations, there are a number of tribal organizations that have been doing the work to support environmental justice. And many of those tribes and organizations, have been on top of the energy transition, the just energy transition for some years. And these are organizations and groups and leaders and tribal governments that they really know their communities. They know the issues, they know the challenges, they understand the financial issues, the geographic issues, the main things that you need to know to succeed in supporting positive change in infrastructure and resilient and renewable infrastructure that would do a lot to lower carbon footprints and get us to where we need to be with regard to the climate crisis. And so, for example, organizations like Solidarity in Detroit have longstanding experience in renewable energy at the community level. Their expertise needs to be elevated. Tribes like the Little Traverse Bay Band, back in the day, they signed the Kyoto Protocol. They were on top of that. And tribal leaders in those tribes, some Michigan tribal leaders are successful at a national level too, and participate in some of those key networks in terms of national discussions about the energy transition. And so I really think we can elevate those voices and those leaders within Michigan who have already been doing the work and have that key knowledge that can close the gap between government initiatives, private industry, and communities.
Thank you, Kyle. Lori, do you have any thoughts you'd like to add?
I guess I just would 100% agree with all the comments that I've already heard. Lansing is like many other communities in Michigan, and we have a history of environmental justice here. And so I don't think we can do that without an emphasis on, incorporating that into all of our climate action plans and our sustainability work here.
Thank you, Lori. And I want to ask a few questions from our attendees today. And the first one, and this is going to be directed at I think primarily at Rep. Levin. How would you encourage your colleagues who are in various ways reluctant to engage in discussions around climate change, including some of the moderates that we have in Michigan, as well as those who are out and out climate action deniers?
Well, I don't think there's just one approach, Dan. Let me give you a few. First of all, climate change is a moral issue. And there is a growing movement among more conservative Christians that are often the base of some of my more conservative colleagues to deal with what's happening to our earth. The Christian Coalition, which started out as something very different, works on this, and there are other groups. So first of all, I think working with those groups, I have worked specifically with those groups to change votes of local Republican officials, for example, when they voted against joining, their county joining the PACE market. So I think that's number one. Number two, young people are our salvation. Young people, this issue cleaves young Republicans more than any other. And they, more young people in the Republican Party as well as the Democratic Party tend to have some, at least, level of consciousness on this. A third answer is just focus on the bottom line. My colleagues, a lot of my moderate and conservative colleagues spend a great deal of time talking about competition with China, Belt and Road, all this stuff about you. Well, how about competing with China, not in some anxious or defensive way, but how about a broad-shouldered, big-hearted American way? Let's get out there and lead the world on these technologies and on implementing them justly. And by the way, if you want to talk about how to deal with our brothers and sisters in the global South who didn't create almost any of this problem. The vast, vast majority was created by in the Industrial Revolution up till, very recently, now that China is the #1 emitter and India is up there and so forth. But the vast majority of it throughout all this time has been created by the several wealthiest countries. Let's step up and work with our friends in Latin America and Africa and Asia, not in a way that gets them in hock like the Belt and Road Initiative does, but really helps them leapfrog. So many poor places in the world don't have reliable electricity at all. Well, what if we go there and help them produce microgrids and renewable energy and locally produced energy? So I think there are many ways, many different angles at this, but I think it's moral, it's political, it's economic, and it's national security. All of those angles work more and less with different ones of the constituents that you've mentioned, or the different parties that you mentioned.
Thank you, Andy. And I think, and I'll ask this for any who care to answer. What struggles are you experiencing when making sure that Black and Brown communities are informed and equipped with information and resources?
I can go ahead and respond to that. A lot of struggle on that. As somebody that's part of numerous environmental justice groups, including being part of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, I would say on the one hand, I've not seen before or heard about before a whole of government response to being inclusive of communities of color and tribal communities. However, nonetheless, there's a lot of concern that what's happening may be wholly inadequate for truly informing those communities. And so I think right now, and if this was a couple of months from now, I might have some more clarity on this, but right now we're in the middle of trying to figure out how to measure whether Justice 40 has been, or whether Justice 40 is going to be achievable. And what I mean by that is we're figuring out if the government's going to commit to Justice 40, how can it, measure its success or its lessons learned in doing so. But right now we're dealing with a lot of challenges in terms of, well, how would we get that data? How would we truly measure that? How would we really evaluate the governmental actions and really respect communities' perspectives and not aim for markers of success that may make sense from the government standpoint, but not from the actual communities that need the support and the resources.
Thank you, Kyle. And as a follow-up to that, someone else asked in particular, how do we recruit persons from these communities so that they can reap the benefits of these programs? And they highlight specifically weatherization contractors and inspectors, and I'd say many other opportunities like that.
I can't speak to that particular profession, but just in general, I'd want to just super briefly point out two things. First, I think there needs to be more information out there, including in the media, that really demonstrates that many of our communities, many people of color communities, are actually models for this type of work. I remember when I was growing up, I didn't really feel that there was such a thing as having a career in Indian country, in tribal governance. If I had seen that more widely, I'd be more attracted to it. I would have been more attracted to it growing up. Another aspect of it is I think it's important to note that oftentimes what keeps people out of certain industries or certain pathways occurs much earlier in the process. So for example, if somebody feels that undergraduate or community college education is not for them, and they feel discriminated when they tried those educational experiences, even if they hadn't declared that they were going into a climate change profession, they may never have the chance to because they didn't go into that, or they didn't complete their degree, or they or they made a decision that closed off some options that may have been attractive to them in the future. So I think we have to look at the entire set of pathways and the entire system that people experience, and really looking at those areas earlier on in people's lives where they face barriers that then make it more challenging for them to take advantage of some of the opportunities regarding climate change.
Thank you, Kyle. I want to note, and I think we have time for one last question here. And Lori, there are a few questions that I think are specific to you from one of our colleagues in on the Lakeshore. And just a note for Brittany, I will follow up with that and facilitate some additional conversation around that specific issue around regional collaboration. And we're having active conversations in Lansing that I think you'd like to hear about. But what I'm going to ask, and I think I'll first direct this to Congressman Levin. Can you talk at all about your thoughts of the role of the circular economy in solving for climate change?
Well, I think it's a really huge area that's so far it's gotten very little attention, certainly in Congress. I was just talking to somebody about this. The first way most people think of it is if they get even a hybrid car or electric vehicle, like what's going to happen to the battery. And, the whole thing of how to try to completely reuse everything and the industrial applications. We actually have an amazing tradition of this in Michigan, and it's in areas that nobody even, no one's aware of. So for example, there's a company here that's basically the leader in the world at taking solvents, which are super difficult chemicals, right? And taking them from the automakers, from their paint shops, and doing the chemistry on them, taking all the waste, turning them back to their raw materials, and providing new solvents of what the automakers use in their paint shops that are 70% constituted by their waste, and they only need 30% new. And that is saving, obviously, a huge amount of the use of solvents and saving money and saving a lot of pollution. And so I don't think we're very far along in this, but it's a huge, the business community is always way ahead of the government, and that, sort of academics and business both. So I think this is an area for people to really drive forward on and be brave with your business ideas, because we are going to have to capture, repurpose, reuse all of these materials in new ways. And it's not recycling, it's something bigger than that. It's about having a life cycle that continues for these precious materials, these difficult materials. And it's true across storage, solar, wind. And so it's going to be hugely important. But I'll tell you one thing, it's not something that's off discussed in Congress. Not yet.
Thank you, Andy. And I want to thank all of our panelists today for taking for sharing your expertise and your time with us. And I want to thank all of our participants today for sharing this part of your evening. Please keep an eye out for an email with the feedback with the feedback survey opportunities to learn more and to get involved in the various initiatives that our three panelists talked about, and to contact us to learn more as well. We'll be hosting a similar discussion on Monday, September 20th, with one of Andy's colleagues, Congressman Peter Meyer, which was a reschedule that from a event last week when our representative had some unplanned adventures, and the Looking forward to that discussion, and again sharing how these issues are important, and moving this is important to our business community leaders in the states. And again, thank you to Congressman Levin, thank you to Dr. Whyte, and thank you to Lori Welch for taking your time today. It's been a great pleasure.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everybody.